I'm Steve Bartlett, and we're now going to go into the last and a highly interactive session in which we're going to talk about the reality of how to make this all come true, of where the rubber meets the road, of what can you do, can your organization do, can we do, can all of us do, and all of our friends do to change the outcome in the areas that we've been talking about of disability inclusion. So if you want to pull the doors to so we can, so let me start by saying that we have two incredible people here who advance opportunities through education, employment, politics, and grassroots and legislation every day of the year. Lauren Appelbaum, you've heard from earlier, the VP of Communications for Respectability, and Philip, I'm looking for his exact title, it's on here somewhere. Philip Pauli, who's the Director of Policy and Practices. So if you want to know what the policy should be, Philip will tell you. If you want to know how to get it implemented, Philip will help to tell you, and I will also. And if you want to know how to communicate it to the American public, then that's Lauren. So now's the time. So let's get real. I'm going to start off with politics because that's been my specialty for a while. So everything that you would like to see different, changed, or even the same for that matter in the area of disability inclusion, whether it's employment or stigmas or discrimination or health care or everything that you can think of, that is in need for improvement and improving inclusion for persons with disabilities, we can talk about it, we can give speeches about it, we can put out social media about it, we can have conferences about it, we can come up with the best ideas in the world, but here's the reality. Unless and until it becomes law, it just didn't happen. Sorry. But it'd be all the best ideas in the world, all the nice things that we talk about, until it becomes law, it doesn't happen. And I can tell you as one who's been there for a long, long time, it has been one of my joys of life to end up sometimes a year, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 10 years later sitting next to someone and they'll say, hey, aren't you the guy that did, and they'll say, yeah, well, it changed my life. I mean, it's earth-shattering. I remember once, the first time that happened to me, I'd passed a bill to free up the FHA market so that people would have much greater access to getting FHA mortgages, and it was a ferocious fight. It's amazing how these good ideas still take a lot of effort to get it passed, and it was a ferocious fight, but I got it passed, signed into law, and 6 months later, I'm sitting at a dinner, and the person sitting next to me was the wife of the chairman, and so I said, making small talk, I said, so what's new with you? She said, oh, the most fabulous thing in the world. My husband and I and our two children, we just bought a house and got an FHA mortgage. She told me all about the house, where the southern sun comes in, the yard and everything. I said, well, that's great. And she said, no, you don't understand. We tried to buy a house with an FHA mortgage 2 years ago, and it was awful. And we got to closing, and the mortgage was canceled because it was all messed up. I said, oh. She said, and so I thought we'd never own a house. I thought we'd just never have a house. We'd always have to live in an apartment. I said, okay. She said, but you know, it was the most amazing thing. Somebody changed the law. And we just moved into the house last week. So somebody changed the law, and that somebody is you. Okay? So let's talk through that a little bit. The people who get elected are the ones who actually write and pass and change the law, and then that goes, as you saw with Section 504, that goes into regulations. But you're the ones, and the people, your grassroots, the people in your organizations that decide who gets elected. It's not magic. It's not something that just kind of happens. The people who live in, does that mean my time is up? Or okay. So you in this room, you're the ones, you decide, the American people decide sort of one at a time who's going to get elected in any one district. Another story. When I was running for Congress, the first time, when I was running for Congress, the time that I got elected, and after that it was just re-election, which is relatively easy. So there was a school, a Jesuit high school, that in my district, who had decided that their high school civics government class project was going to be to decide who would get elected to Congress that year because it was an open seat. So these guys had figured out in high school that open seats matter a lot and that it's much easier to elect somebody to Congress if it's an open seat than you're running against an incumbent. And they also noticed that usually those incumbents last about 10 years. And so then reading the newspaper, they noticed that there were 11 people running for Congress for that seat that year. And they called all 11 of us and said, would you come in, this is a high school class, would you come in for interviews? Well, as you might imagine, 4 of those candidates said, I'm not going to come in for an interview with a bunch of high school kids, so they take them off the list, right? And the others of us came in. They interviewed us from start to finish, from top to bottom, everything that you could. It was the most rigorous interview I had ever had, okay? And at the end, then they all sat down and thought about it and came up and decided to endorse me. So 5 of them who led this effort in that class, they recruited 500 high school students who put up all of my yard signs. They first made all of my yard signs, hammered them, and then put them up. And then, regrettably, politics happens. One of the other campaigns decided that they would go tear them down. And I brought these 5 students in and said, we got bad news. Oh, we know, we're gonna tear down their yard signs. I said, no, you're not. No, you're not, because then we'd find 5,000 people that would vote against me, right? I said, we're going to get together on Saturday and build 5,000 more signs, and you're going to put them back up. And they did. They also made half of the telephone calls that went into the election. So I went back later to sort of say, my campaign did, sort of say, how did I get elected? By the way, I was a landslide winner. I got 17,000 votes, but that was 57% of the people that voted. 57%. I went back later and figured out that those 500 high school students organized by those 5 was the difference in the campaign, and thus led to the ADA. See, so it wasn't about me getting elected. It was about those 5 and 500 others and other volunteers that decided they were going to do something about politics in that district. So this is an election year. But guess what? It's always an election year. There is no non-election year. This election year, and of course, we're all going to pay a lot of attention on the debates on the presidential candidates, and we're doing that with Respectability too, and that's a good thing, okay? But the real decisions are going to be made by the people who run for Congress and the Senate and state legislature and school board and city council. So let me give you just the easy way. It's not easy, but the direct and quick and dirty way to actually have an impact. First, pick out somebody, a candidate or an elected official that you think and this, by the way, this is not for you individually, but it is for you individually. It's for you individually to then transmit to the people that you know. Pick out somebody that you like, that you think you like. You don't have to know that you like them. Just kind of look through the materials, look on their website and say, well, that seems like pretty good, right? Calvin does this for a living. You can ask him. And if you think you like them, call them up and say, when's your next public meeting? I'd like to come. And if they don't have one, well, then take them off your list. Or if they don't invite you, then take them off your list and go to the next one and go to the public meeting, ask a couple of questions, make it about disability issues or anything. And if you still like them, well, then go to another, just say, put me on your list, and then go to another one. And if you still like them, it really doesn't take much to offer an hour a week or 2 hours a week for the campaign, to go to the headquarters, to go to the to put up the name tags, to put up the yard signs. There are all kinds of things that you can do in a campaign, and that candidate will never forget you ever. I was debating, trying to decide what the law that became IDEA, which is the extension of 94-142, that guarantees that young people, that the students have a right to a free and least restrictive education, right? Mainstream, and I'm sort of trying to figure out how to tell the story and how important this was and such as that. And I got a little letter from one of the students one of the young people and her mother that helped me in my campaign. She has Down syndrome, and her mother sent me a photo and said, it turned out her name was Jennifer. This is Jennifer, who had come to my headquarters and helped. She has Downs, and this is her class photo. I said, well, isn't that interesting? Thanks. And she said, no, you don't understand. This is the first time that Jennifer, because of this law, the first time that Jennifer had ever been allowed in her class photo. Wow. So it matters. And the fact that Jennifer and her mom, Darlene, came to my campaign and helped in the campaign, that's what got my attention to notice this particular fact. So all these things get connected, and it then really matters who you get elected and how you communicate. One last thing, and that is just maintain the communications with whoever you develop a relationship with. You can do it with one person, with one official, or two or three or four, but do it kind of systematically. And then when they get elected, they'll come back and they'll also have public meetings. Show up at the meetings. Ask a question about disability inclusions. By the way, you're not looking for them to say yes to your question. You're looking for them to hear you and to understand this is important to you, and since you helped to get them elected, it becomes important to them. And you will change the direction of the world by that approach. It really works, and democracy works, but it only works for people who work at it. I mean, sorry, it kind of might make you sad, but that's the rule. The only people whose votes get counted are the ones who vote. The only people that help decide how people are going to vote are the ones that get somehow active. You don't have to do a lot. You don't have to make a life of it, but it's just part of being of citizenship. So we're going to do that at Respectability. We have already. We've started. We encourage you to, in your organizations, to set out and make a difference. Now, with that long-winded, sorry about that, but I get passionate about politics and about making a difference in the outcome, because it's really not about politics. It's really about using politics to change the laws to accomplish the goal. Richard Nixon, up here in 1973, when he signed Section 504, I can tell you that if we hadn't had 504, we wouldn't have had anything. Now, it also, by the way, it took the grassroots after that to get the regulations signed, true, right? Then it took the grassroots and the activists, but the grassroots and activists and the sit-in in the building would never have happened had someone in Congress not decided that Section 504 was a law worth passing, and then convincing Richard Nixon to sign it. I think he was on his way to the helicopter at the time to go back to California, but that's okay. We'll take it. Signature is a signature. So with that, Philip, I'm going to start with you. So those things are others, in your view, from where you sit at Respectability. Wait a minute, before I do this, after we do our panel thing, then I'm going to turn it back to you so you can be thinking, writing down, take a pen and kind of write down. We want to know, and we're going to write these ideas on this board, we want to know what you think Respectability should do over the course of the next year, what our priorities should be, and what kinds of issues should we tackle, and how should we do it. So get ready for that. I'm giving you fair warning. So, Philip, so in your view, what can the people in this room and there must be 10,000 people represented in this room through your grassroots organizations. So what are the most important things that they can do to advance opportunities for education and employment?
Thank you so much. Wow. I have several different ideas and several different strains of thought that I really want to bring out to it. I want to go to the point where we are in terms of one of the big laws we talked about today, which was the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA. It's a term you're going to hear a lot if you read any of Respectability's emails or read any of our reports or read any of our op-eds. And the reason why is it's a law which has been on the books for 4 years, and there's a lot of issues with implementation. But the important thing about it, and where there's a chance to get involved, it really is where the rubber meets the road. So, for example, at the national level, WIOA represents $17 billion in federal funding for workforce programs. $17 billion. Now, the crucial decision point where how that money gets spent and how that money gets distributed are at state and local workforce development boards. These boards have, the responsibility to set priorities, to set policies, to figure out what works, what doesn't, and really meet that intersection of policy and practice, which is captured in my title. One of the great things is, by law, these meetings have to be public. So, there's a state board in every state, and then there are local boards throughout each state. And I think it can make a tremendous difference in terms of jobs for people with disabilities. So, for example, Iowa, not exactly a state you'd think would be really good on disability issues, has consistently been among the top 10 states with the highest employment rates for people with disabilities. And one of the factors that I attribute to that success is the fact that there's a disability advocate serving on every local workforce board in Iowa. Every board.
And that didn't just happen.
It did not.
That took activists, political skill, and political leverage to cause that to happen.
It
Philip, go
did,
ahead.
because you had a commitment from the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation to offer leadership opportunities to its client list, which, that's not in the law. It's an idea which was implemented because the person who was heading VR in Iowa believed that the best way to achieve the law was to say all means all. I think another thing, and there's not just workforce boards you can get involved with. There's boards, there's commissions, there's agencies. Actually, Governor Gavin Newsom, when he just got elected in California, put out a call to all of the constituent groups which had been very involved in his campaign to say, here is a list of 1,000 different state boards and commissions, and we want candidates from across the diversity of California to apply to work for these jobs. And I can tell you that, we did our part to distribute that information to disability organizations across the great state of California. And likewise, I think something else that people can do is really getting the message out there. You'll hear that we repeat our messages a lot. We talk about fighting stigmas. We talk about advancing opportunities. And one of the ways that you can personally do that is by, for example, writing an op-ed. Now, why that's important is because it gets the message out there. It repeats the message again and again that people with disabilities have the same dreams as everyone else, that disability is part of the human experience, and that people with disabilities have skills to contribute to the workforce. Writing an op-ed is pretty easy. It takes, some time to get good at it, but there's a lot of state and local newspapers that are always eager for hearing a personal, compelling story backed up with data. And if you need the data, go to our website. If you need an idea or an example of what a good op-ed looks like, go to our website. So those are a couple of things.
You can go to one of these council meetings. They're public. You can go and you can sit, and at some point somebody's going to say, do you have anything to say? Ask them a question, right? And if you're polite and respectful, but you also have something to say, some knowledge, it's amazing how you will get recruited to kind of come in and be a part of it. It's a matter, the hardest thing to do is to start. That's the very hardest thing to do. I remember a guy, one night when I was running for city council, the knock on my kitchen door at 6 o'clock on Sunday night. The back door, the kitchen door. There's a guy named Jim Richards, and he knocked on me. He says, Steve, I'm really sorry. We've met along the way, and I like what you're doing in the campaign, but I can't really help much. But I was on my way home, and I saw your house. I thought I'd come by and see what I could do to help. I said, well, he said, but I work. I carry 2 jobs, and so I said, well, what would you like to? He said, well, I'll just do anything. I said, well, so you're free on Sunday nights? He said, well, yeah. I said, okay. Why don't you come by next Sunday, and you can be the Sunday night shift supervisor. And then he became in charge of something else. And when I got elected to city council, I made him chairman of the Martin Luther King Jr. Board of Directors. And then he went on to be the chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for the city of Dallas. And then went on to run for the city council for my seat, and won, and was there for 3 terms. Okay. And it was just because he was driving by feeling guilty because he hadn't stopped to offered my help. So the hardest thing is to just start, and your impact will be immeasurable. Lauren, on fighting stigmas, so what can we do as grassroots in that area?
It's a very broad
course.
question. So I will talk about 2 different areas of our work. One is in terms of the political work, and one is in terms of our Hollywood inclusion work. So when it comes to the political work, piggybacking on what Philip does in the policy and practices, we are looking at specifically candidates. We look at candidates for president, candidates for governor, candidates for Senate. The reason we don't drill down much more than that is just because of staff time and capacity. However, we have had individuals come to us and say, hey, I'm really interested in doing a candidate questionnaire for my local race. And that's something where we're able to give our national candidate questionnaire and say, hey, here are some questions, and you can adapt them for your race. So it's everything that we do at the national level can be adapted to the local level, to school board, whatever it might be that anyone is involved with. I got my background in journalism. I started at NBC News in the political journalism unit, and during the 2006 midterm and 2008 presidential cycle and Obama transition years. And since then, I've had the opportunity to kind of try and figure out how to get different issues covered. And last cycle, when I asked my friends who are still over at NBC and other places, I said, how can I get you to cover disability issues? And their response was, we will cover it if the candidates talk about it. And the candidates will talk about it if they're asked to talk about it. So last cycle, we actually organized a group of fellows spearheaded by Ben Spangenberg, who helped you check in here. He's outside at registration. And literally going to Iowa and New Hampshire and going to the town halls, not as press, but as individuals, folks with visible disabilities as well as non-visible disabilities, asking questions, and the other person just holding up their iPhone and recording the answer so we could share it. What I've seen this cycle already is utterly amazing, because last cycle we were trying to get people to go out and do it, and it wasn't happening on a mass level. This year already, folks in New Hampshire have done their own candidate questionnaire, getting a majority of candidates to send back videos and responses. It is being done by people all over, which makes me feel really great, seeing all this work being done by everyone. We're going to still continue our outreach to presidential candidates. One of my favorite days was about last week, and we've done calls with 9 different Democratic campaigns, and obviously it's open to all parties to kind of talk to us and learn about how they can be more accessible. One day last week, I had a call with one of the leading Democratic presidential campaigns on like how they can make their website more accessible, who they can maybe get to help them with that, and just a bunch of different questions that they were asking me on how they can do. And then in the afternoon, I was over at Sundance Institute working with people on how to ensure better representation on TV. And so it's fun to kind of do both areas. In terms of representation in Hollywood, it's something that that we really work to educate the studios and networks on not only the why but the how of including people with disabilities. There is a similarity between Hollywood and politics, and people listen to what is demanded. People, want to win awards. Shows like Born This Way being nominated, year after year for Emmys show that inclusion is not just the right thing to do, but it really can draw in, and the disability market is worth $1 trillion. So oftentimes using that can be a very good talking point, because Hollywood runs on money, and being able to say that it is effective in both ways. And so tweeting can be very important, because people do pay attention to what is out there on the Twitterverse, in terms of calling for and demanding for more representation of characters with disabilities on your favorite TV shows. And then writing about that in the same way of writing op-eds on something that might be a law, writing about pieces. We just published a piece on New Amsterdam on the representation of multiple types of disabilities, and how it's become almost like a accidental best practice. And the writers, the folks at NBC circulated that, and then the writers' room, they started tweeting it out, of how they realized that their work is being recognized. And when people's work on disability inclusion is being recognized, whether it's a political candidate or whether it's your favorite TV show, they're going to, just like Congressman Sherman said before, if they're getting those accolades from people, whether it's through written pieces, through social media, or any other means, they're going to be much more likely to continue to want to do that.
Awesome. So let me turn it over to you. I gave you ample time to think of some ideas for what you think we should be, meaning collectively we, not just Respectability, what the disability community can do to expand grassroots and inclusion. Yes, sir.
Mine's more about the federal level
Okay.
law.
Wait. I'll get the microphone.
What'd you expect me to get it?
Get my steps in.
Got to do everything around here?
No, wait a minute. Larry has a job opening. You're hiring.
I am hiring, since we're talking.
He's hiring.
Yes, I'm hiring. It's the Easter Seals Disability Staffing Network, which is a social venture, innovative new way to really scale disability employment. And we have an opening for its program director. So if you're interested, please see me, because we
Here's
really
my
want to
here's my
hire
resume.
a good, we would love you, Steve. Come on. So my question is, is there any federal effort, or could there be, to break the link between earnings and Medicaid and support services through
Yeah.
the state DDA?
Absolutely.
That is one of the biggest things.
It is,
Yeah.
it is, I think it's the largest single barrier to employment today, in my opinion. So I tackled that in the 80s and got a couple of changes. There are three changes, actually, that I got. One of them didn't get passed until 2 years ago. The first one was to make permanent Section 1619. Section 1619 says that if you have access to Medicare through SSDI and you get you get a job, that's great, but and you lose your Medicare. But if you then lose your job, meaning it doesn't work out, the difficulty is everyone in the disability community knows the difficulty is it takes 2 years on a good day to get reinstated during that time, so you're at risk. Same with Medicaid. And so in Medicaid, we got a provision of the law passed that says, by the way, it's not very well implemented, but it actually says that if you're eligible for SSI and Medicaid and you get a job and you get earnings, you can buy into Medicaid up to a certain level. So you don't lose the Medicaid automatically. It depends on your earnings. Now, as you know, HHS doesn't do a particularly good job of implementing that. I've actually spent 6 months trying to get a friend of mine reinstated on Medicaid after she didn't get a job. She inherited a life insurance policy, and so it took same disability, but you know the story. The third, though, is the new one that I was really impressed with. I introduced this in the 80s when I was in Congress, didn't get it passed, and then came back in the 2000s, and a guy named Anders Crenshaw took it up, and it became what's now known as the ABLE Act. The ABLE Act allows your relatives, usually it's grandma or uncle or somebody, to set aside a trust fund money to provide for a small amount of income for that person, have it not count against Medicaid. So those are the three. The last one that I'm particularly passionate about, just because I think it's so stupid and contrary to just decency, and that is the asset cap on SSI and on Medicaid. That we tell people, we want you to be successful, but if you have $1 more than $2,000 in your bank account, then you're out of luck. You lose all of your benefits until you get them reinstated. So my wife and I are sponsoring an SSI person who's totally disabled, but she manages it herself. She regulates it by the simple deal. If she sees her bank account sort of approach $2,000, she takes it out of the bank account, puts it in her sock drawer that I don't know about, and puts it right under. I'm from Texas, so pardon me, but she puts it right under her little ladies revolver 32 special, so nobody will get the. But that's a Texas thing. Yeah. But anyway, it's the asset cap is horrible. And I have to tell you, if we had some grassroots movements of people who would go to town halls and say, Congressman, why do you tell people who are disabled that they can't have $2,001? Why do you do that? Because no one can answer it. And at least we could get it raised. Other questions?
Hello. In regards to talking about work incentives and barriers, can you do something about the fact that the SGA limit is like higher for people that are blind and it's lower for those who aren't? And even though they say expedited reinstatement is easier, I applied for expedited reinstatement back like March, February, and I still haven't gotten anything. And the thing is, I make enough to like go off better, but not enough to be self-sufficient. And also, is there a way we can like figure out to make it to allow Uber, Lyft to be deducted? Because paratransit stinks.
Yeah, it does. It does. Absolutely. So those are the kinds of issues that you introduce to a congressman or a congressional candidate and say, what can you do? They say, I'm going to look into it, and then you follow up with an email and a letter, and then 6 months later you call back to their staff and follow up one more time. So those are the kinds of issues that if you can plant in the minds of members of Congress or other grassroots, you can actually get changes made, but they're difficult. And by the way, on the SGA with the blind, my advice is never try to use a take it away tool, meaning you don't want to go and say take that eligibility away from blind people. You want to say we think other disabilities should have the same eligibility as blind people. So raise up, don't take away. Yes, over here.
We can't hear you.
You have to turn it on.
There we go. Hi again. I was just going to say, I do think another opportunity for both politicians and different organizations to get involved with is the fact that the Disability Act will be signed for 30 years next year. And so it is definitely, to me, an opportunity that I think a lot of people should be able to capitalize on with this whole conversation of visibility and things like that. Wanted to know with the panelists, what are some things that you all are even thinking about in order to, it's going to be a big year, it's 30 years. And so what are some things that we could be able to even talk to politicians, talk to people to be able to get that visibility for an opportunity bigger and wider.
Philip?
Well,
And it'll be a big year with much thanks to Honorary Bartlett.
Well, there are a lot of people involved, but thank you.
hello? All right. So, so next year is going to be a big year. As you said, it's the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I think that there's going to be a lot of retrospectives. I think there's going to be a great hunger for, interesting stories of what it's been like for people with disabilities to grow up in the legacy of that. I mean, 30 years is a long time. And there's a whole conversation that started 4 years ago at the 25th anniversary about the ADA generation, that we have a generation of both people with and without disabilities who grew up together in integrated schools and saw, the same opportunities ideally. And obviously, 2020 is going to be the most fractious, most expensive, biggest, long out dust of a fight up for the presidency ever. But I think it's, important to look to that. I know that Respectability is already thinking about what we're going to do for the 30th anniversary. This is going to be a much bigger event next year. We hope all of you will be back. I'm ready to sign up for, doing op-eds or, going out there and telling your story about how the ADA has changed your life. I would also just quickly flip back to say, let's not neglect what we can accomplish this year. We've got a week until the later this week is the 29th anniversary of the ADA, and there's still, a chance to put together a short, compelling op-ed and get it submitted to your local paper. Also this year, obviously everybody's really focused on the 2020 races, but there's competitive governor's races in 3 states this year that are going to be decided soon: Kentucky, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Kentucky and Louisiana, both the Democrats and the Republicans really want to flip those seats, and that's a race where a conversation about how the most vulnerable in society are being treated in those states, could make a major difference. And Mississippi is going to be, there's going to be a lot of infighting around that particular election. So let's not forget what we can do now. And as we think about it, I think, look forward to how we can tell our stories and how we can leverage the tools of digital media, which will segue to Lauren. What do you think we can do for this year and next year?
Well, any journalist is always looking for a news hook. Submitting an op-ed at a random time usually may not get picked up. But that's why Philip was talking about how this week is the anniversary, the 29th anniversary, where it's a time where you might get someone to pick something up. When it's a bigger anniversary or like 30 years, that can be a news hook of why someone might be interested in reporting on something. And I think it's important, the fact that people are looking for personal stories. And, a comparison also of, growing up with the ADA versus not growing up with the ADA, because you have a lot of people who talk about the difference of what happened to them when the ADA was signed into law. And then it's also a time to look at what the ADA was intended to do and still needs to do. The employment rate isn't much higher than it was when the ADA was signed into law. So in terms of being able to point out that just the fact that a law was signed does not mean that everything it intended to do has been done, and what type of work can still be done in order to ensure that all people with disabilities are getting the access that we want.
So I've got several things to say about that, to build on that. First of all, hang on just 1 second. I'm going to respond to it also. Okay, then we'll come back. First of all, don't be afraid of the Republican and Democrat thing. I'm a Republican, lifetime Republican. I'm also a never Trump Republican, but yeah, thanks. And there are a lot more of us than there are of them, but nevertheless, they've got the microphone. But it takes both parties, or it takes all parties. So wherever you sort of find yourself attracted to in a political party, go there and be proud of it, and then change your party. I can tell you that a pro-disability inclusion Republican in Congress right now is far more valuable than 15 pro-disability Democratic congressmen, not because they're not worth, it's just we got a lot of those. But we don't have that many Republicans right now that will speak up. So number one, don't be afraid of R&D. And the other thing is, don't be afraid of local races, of city councils and state senates and legislators. Those school boards, they make a huge difference. So that's one thing. Second, I'm going to have a somewhat of a different advocacy, I think, than is typical that you usually start with about the celebration of the 30th anniversary of ADA, and that is. If we celebrate it and stop, then we've done nothing. The ADA is not self-implementing. There's still 63% of the persons with disabilities in this country are still unemployed. Now only 63% are unemployed. Now that's better than 73% 30 years ago when we passed ADA, but that's still 63%. We still have 5,000 people on the waiting list for school to work transition for supported employment in the state of Maryland alone, okay? Of young people ages 17 to 22 who want to work and who need a small amount of assistance that's in the law called school coaches, okay? Or called work coaches, but they're on a 5,000 waiting list. The 40% of all inmates have disabilities, and a large number of those are inmates in prison because of their disabilities. So we've got a long ways to go with disability inclusion. So we should celebrate the ADA in the context of what more needs to happen. And lay out some of those issues that need to happen. Yes, over here.
So, hi. Again, my name is Nell Richardson.
No, you were over there. Now you see over there. Okay. You're sneaking up on me. Yeah. I'm sorry. Bless you.
We need two of you.
Thank you. So, my name is Nell Richardson. So, I have a question for Congress. For the people who become disabled over 50. It's such an incredible, and I'm putting myself in this place. It's such an incredible, difficult place to be where you have worked 20 plus years, let's say for an example, and then you become disabled. They are basing your qualification, let's say for an example, SSDI, on your education and work experience. And you're not able to work anymore now because you're over 50, you're disabled, people don't want to hire you, and yet you don't qualify for SSDI, as for an example. So what can Congress do in an event like that to make us over 50 more inclusive, where we can have an income and be able to live a quality of life that we deserve?
So good question. In fact, I had a too long a conversation with the RSA commissioner when she left here, the chairman of the seven agencies. Mary, was that her name, right? So I'll give you my answer. I don't know of a law that could be passed that's the fix to that. There may well be some things in the law that can be adjusted. I think the right approach, the approach that's best, is to figure out ways that people over 50 can be encouraged, motivated, freed up, made independent so they can get back to work, because that's what they want to do. And there are a lot of steps to that, but the biggest step, many disabilities for over 50 occur on the job, some kind of workers' comp. And the most important thing for that is to get the insurance company, the AFLAC or Unum, to get to that person like immediately, so that they can get their mind right, that you can work. And we're going to have to make some adjustments in your work style, with some adjustments in your workplace, so that you can work, but you can work and be more healthy. Now, that's not everybody. Some, like as I said, my wife and I are sponsoring a 60-year-old woman who cannot work. Okay, it's not possible. But I think if we focus on what you can do, I think we're better. And I think if we use the insurance companies and some of the Department of Labor to encourage that. So too often we end up telling people that, who are injured on the job, well, you're never going to go back to work, so just give up and apply for SSDI. I think SSDI should be the last resort, not the first. It's my opinion.
Actually, I'll jump in on that. Hello?
Yeah.
That's on, but all right, there we go. It's not much of an answer, but Bartlett did highlight one area where the Office of Disability Employment Policy, who was on the panel earlier, talked about this issue. They are in the process of looking at return to work and stay at work initiatives, grant programs to really test what are the best practices to help that aging individual who acquires a disability to, stay in the workplace. And I think, don't look for, a federal solution when a state solution can be done instead. So, for example, I'm going to bring it up again, and it's again because it's the caucus state, but Iowa's vocational rehabilitation program also has a program for aging workers who age into disability. It's called rehoming, and so their vocational rehabilitation counselors contract with one of the biggest healthcare providers in the state to help their aging workforce realign instead of doing physically demanding jobs such as being an ER nurse. Being a care coordinator, finding another job that leverages that person's skill set and experience to keep them in the workforce until they can retire. I think there's, a lot, maybe not a federal law that could be passed to solve that problem, but I think there's a lot of lower level solutions that we can fight for and then we could see implemented to help that particular segment of, the continuity and spectrum of disability.
Thank you. One more question.
Just get someone who
Okay.
hasn't asked a question.
Okay.
Who
Go
has
ahead.
not asked a question? Have you not asked?
Not yet.
Okay.
Okay,
And-
go ahead.
Oh,
Two-
we have a new hand back there.
Back there, all the way
Okay.
Okay, here I go. How many steps did we do today?
So I'm an executive director over at the Independent Living Resources of Solano in Contra Costa County. That's in the Bay Area in California. And one of the things that I am finding, and you are right, seniors are hard to place to go back to work after the age of 50, but we keep doing appeals till we get them on Social Security. So an independent living center is a good place to start to fight that denial. But we're finding that when people do go back to work, on the ticket to work, they have a 9-month trial work period on SSDI, but I have not been very successful lately on those overpayments that come into my office. We have a lot of people that, they can't work full-time, they work part-time to supplement their income, and that's how I do get people to go back to work, because they can't afford to live in the Bay Area. But even when they're over $100 on that, maybe that month that they got paid 3 times, right, a third pay period, that's really hard to fight. So, that's a component that we need to get before we get people to go back to work, that they have a clear understanding of what the rules are for Social Security before they go back to work, using the ticket to work.
Yeah, the rules of Social Security, both Social Security, SSI, SSDI, are way too restrictive and sort of harsh, and it's the harshness that and the complexity of it that ties people up. It's it's nothing to be proud of. And this is, by the way, this is this is from Republican and Democrat. It's been that way since the 1970s that I can recall. The rules are too harsh and too harshly enforced. So on that somber note, unless someone has a really wonderful question to say, this is the let me show you the promised land is the mountaintop. So let me say this to you. Each of you are extraordinary, and you're very special in your work area. You've devoted either all of your life or most of your life to this issue of disability inclusion, and you're making a huge difference. And I want you to know that your participation here made a big difference to us. We look at Respectability. We look forward to staying in touch with you and to continue this community, if you will. So thank you for what you do. One last. I'm a politician, so this one is the inspirational story. The story of a Chinese philosopher, once a professor who had a smart alecky professor of philosophy, a smart alecky student in his class who decided to trick the professor and give him a question that was unanswerable, a conundrum, as they say. And so he went up to the professor afterwards and he said, "Professor, I have in my hands, I have a delicate white bird, a dove. And in my hand, your question that I want to ask you is this bird dead or alive?" The professor immediately recognized the trick, the conundrum, because if he said the bird is alive, the student would crush it, proving him wrong. If he said it was dead, he would release it, proving him wrong. So the professor gave him the right answer, and this is the answer for you as you go forth in these areas. The answer, friends, is in your hands.